Good afternoon, it's Joyful Hermit. Um, I'm going to talk about the times my mother has visited me since she passed. And also I'm going to start with one time that I saw her and in a vision, and it was before she had passed. It was about 1 year prior to her passing. And I was reminded of this because of a viewer, a recent viewer, new viewer, who shared the story of her just part of her story of being the fourth of four daughters, and her father did not want another daughter. And he was very verbal about it before she was born, if it was another girl. And he made good on his promise of having nothing to do with her and not helping financially with her, not taking care of her. And it's quite a story. Look in the comments and read. And how her mother handled it and what happened with her mother. Her mother then became a religious later in life, which I find amazing because when I would have been 49, I think, or before then, uh, maybe it was 48. I was already trying to figure out what was my next step because my son was going to be leaving for college. And it was before, though, that I had my hermit vocation, or about that time, but not quite. So I was exploring. And I had written off to various, uh, thinking maybe I was called to the religious life. And my daughters were all in favor of that, or anything. They were already out of college. One was married or getting married. The one followed shortly after getting married. And the son was going to be away at college, and he wasn't going to be coming back home after college. So they were in favor of whatever I felt called to do. But God wasn't in favor. I was not accepted into any religious order. Part of it was I had been divorced, but this mother had been divorced. So I think she probably knew the convent that she went to, knew the sisters there, and they understood or had met her and knew her situation rather than me just call. I called on the phone different places. And there was email then, so I did email also. Email was very new then. So, but that wasn't my path. The hermit life was, and I should have figured out from what my grandmother had said earlier on. But I did then, later, I realized God was calling me to the hermit life and how that had fit with the 1986 and early 87 vision and locutions from my grandmother. But I just find this woman's story, her life story, her mother's deceased now, but had been a religious sister for 20 years, about the last 20 years of her life, her mother had. And she misses her mother very much. And actually, it was really one of the sweetest things that I had said was that the things that I say reminded her of her mother, things that her mother would have said, and my voice reminds her of her mother, like when she closes her eyes and listens to these videos. And I just had never thought of my voice. I've not been complimented that much. So at least not for a long time. I'm not around people, but not from family, really. I'm not. And I think it's typical, maybe sometimes, of single mother, or all the suffering that they had growing up. But also, I've I've progressed since I was younger. So I think I'm hoping and thinking and praying that I've become a better person. I hope and pray that I've had to get on top of my tone of voice. Of course, I don't have to use that. I don't have children that was my means of discipline, was my voice talking to them, and they would know. And when my pain was bad, I would even warn my son in particular, don't push it. My pain is high, and I don't want to lose a grip. Don't push it. Just obey. I would give the warning because I didn't want to raise my voice. I didn't want to freak out with temper, use my voice in an angry tone, which I had. My life was very, very frustrating with, especially when we were still in California, and I had that situation with being tormented a lot by the ex-husband and awful things happening. So I just appreciated that being said, that my voice reminded the woman of her mother, and how she hadn't seen her mother and she misses her husband, but feels her mother's presence. So that got me to thinking that I had not shared yet about the times my mother visited after she died. But I want to remind everyone that our loved ones can visit us. And if you're already feeling their presence, ask God, ask the Holy Spirit, ask, can my loved one can I please see them? Or could they visit me? Ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. However, from my experience, it has never been when I would consciously think, I want to see them, or I would ask to see them. It always came out of need, when I had a need that I didn't connect with having my mother come and help me. I would call out in need, call out to my mother, as I had called out to my grandmother years before, my deceased grandmother, who was very close and a tremendous role model for me, because her husband died and she had 8 children. And it was right before the Depression. He died unexpectedly. So that was I thought, call on my grandmother, because I had 3 children. My grandmother had her health, but it nearly broke her. My mother had told me about how my grandmother, she would see her mother crying and hear her mother crying at night, and how hard it was, and that her mother wasn't the same for a while, quite a while after her husband died, that it was a terrible strain and terrible upset. And financially also. So ask. I'm suggesting to this person who misses her mother, ask, or anyone. But it generally, from my experience, we get the help when it's a need, a specific need and that we're not expecting it. We're not calling out because we want to see them. We're just calling out in general, help me, or crying out, mom, how did you do it? Or please be with me, or help me get through this. So I'll share the times I saw my mother, and that will sort of explain the circumstances. But I don't see anything wrong if there is an emotional or a loving need. Go ahead and ask. Ask God. Ask the Holy Spirit. Ask Jesus. Ask your mother. If at all, if you could just come in a dream, I would be so grateful. I would be consoled, or it would mean a lot. If it happens, praise God. If not, just understand. His will wasn't that was necessary for you. And and also, I sort of think I had felt when I was talking about my dad visiting that I hadn't seen him or heard from him in a long time, because I hadn't had the need, but I also felt and realized I had really disrespected my mother. And there were reasons for that. I was exhausted, blah, blah, blah. Um, it had been a very rough last 11 months with her, helping her prepare to pass. Um, and she had a temper problem, and was very critical, and wasn't happy about dying. But I still regretted. So I came up with a plan of what I'm going to do next week. Yeah, next week, or it might be the week after. The schools will be back open in the Midwest and in the hometown, and I'm going to investigate and make arrangements for setting up a memorial scholarship at the high school for a student who's going to major in English in college. And preference would be for maybe for a girl, I think, and also if it's someone of a single parent household, and even disabled mother, because I thought, when I die, whatever memorials for me from the handful of people who might leave a memorial, since I'm out of the social network and closer friends that I used to have, since I'm a hermit. I haven't kept up, and I moved away, so I don't have that close connection to people, as in seeing them, friends and things, seeing them that often. But if anyone would, then I could have that donation go to the scholarship that's in my mother's name, because she was an English teacher at the high school for many years. And she also was a champion of young women, and particularly those who had been through hardship based on my hardship. My mother really, my accident and divorce really affected my parents a lot. And my mother, I think in particular, it opened her up to what can happen. And she knew from her own growing up with her father dying, but I was the only one in the family to be divorced, and it was a shock to my parents and an upset. That wasn't supposed to happen, and also the court system and the unfairness of settlement, and the battle, and how horrible the husband had been, was a shock to them, and me too. We all, you expect laws to be followed and fairness to happen and justice, and it doesn't always happen. So my mother, I think, became even more a champion of women, young women who were in a plight. So I think she'd really like that. And then it wasn't but maybe that afternoon or the next morning, I sensed my father telling me, my dad, to contact this man who had quit in anger helping me. A year and a half ago, he quit. Contact him and see if he would come back. I texted, he called me, and he came back to help work. And yes, it's expensive, but he's does things right. It's not as fast as I thought he might go with it, but I'm in a bind, and I'm grateful. And that was a sense of my dad giving me that suggestion. So I felt that I had come upon something that my dad wanted of me for my mother, for his wife in this life. And of course, Jesus says, in heaven there aren't marriages, and there aren't genders. he mentions that in scripture, that it's just souls. So I don't know. I mean, I know we see people, and if we need to see them in an image, we see them as they were on earth, in a gender, but it's not going to be the same as earth in that regard, as far as being married, and the love is going to be spread throughout all aspects of our being with others and with God. The focus will be on God. So, my mother, the first time she came, it was before she died. It was a year, practically a year to the month. And it was after my dad had come to tell me he would start helping with her. He was going to start helping with her to help get her back to my hometown and where she grew up, because there was a lovely nursing home there, and I lived there, and her sister was still alive there, and other relatives could come see her who were in close areas if they wished or whatever, and a couple of other longtime friends. So it would be the most reasonable place for her to be, as opposed to out in Arizona, where I couldn't get out there much to be with her or help her. I had tried, and that didn't work out. She ended up not wanting me to stay with her. I was willing to do that, but and it turned out for the best. I needed to be back riding herd on my son, who was home from college, and keep up the house and make sure he wasn't. There had been a party while I was gone, in other words, and it got a little bit loud, and he knew better, and the kids, of course, didn't clean up, and it was a mess. So I couldn't trust at his age yet that he would behave, or his friends. It was too much of a temptation. So I saw my mother. It was a waking vision. I was awake. She appeared. She was not herself, but it was my mother. But she was nowhere how she would have acted, even then. Her hair was all wild, sticking out and long and sort of curled and spiked out, and red, bright fire engine red hair. And she was her whole body was covered. She had beautiful, beautiful skin. She didn't have my wrinkles even when she was 15 years older, or 14 years older when she died. She didn't have nearly my wrinkles. I don't think she hardly had any. Her skin was beautiful. She didn't have the marks and the dark areas. This was where they had taped my bandages for my surgery and ripped them off, and then had to do them and rip them off again, took skin off. So I have marks from my 1980 surgery, reminders, but she had just one little clear patch of skin on this cheek, and she was just wild acting and out of control and demonic. She was like a devil, and all the rest of her skin was red, not fire engine red, but red skin, just red, and except for this one clear patch, and her hair was that bright red, all just corkscrews out, and she was spinning around and screaming and saying horrible things, and it was the most horrific thing to see my mother like that. And I knew immediately, then it dissipated, that vision dissipated. I knew my mother was in trouble. Her soul was in serious trouble. and she hadn't died yet. Didn't know how much longer she had. One doctor had thought a year or two, and it ended up being maybe 3 more years she lived, or two more, I guess. Yes, it would have been 2 more years. But that's when I decided. I saw this pilgrimage offered, and I got this strong sense I was to go on it. It was over in Europe. I didn't have the money to pay for it. This was back in 2003. I had never traveled like that since the surgery and all the pain I had. I had no medications other than Aleve and Excedrin, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. A priest in the diocese who I knew was leading it with another priest. And all I thought was is offer myself, what may, to my body, even if I would die doing it. Go on that pilgrimage, and because we were going to see churches all over Italy. And we didn't go to San Giovanni Rotondo, which was disappointing, but we were in all the major areas of Italy, Rome in particular, and church after church after church, and the Vatican and all, St. Peter's. And I vowed I would pray for my mother's soul at every single church on my knees on the floor. That was what I felt I needed to do. And I couldn't tell my mother anything of this. I didn't have the money. It was maybe it was $1,400. It was a steal back then compared to what it would be now, including air flights or something. It wasn't bad, but I only had, I think, $300. My neighbor was trying to sell her house, and I offered to paint, to do work. And I got some jobs doing some painting and earned some money. I still was short $700. And the priest said he liked what I was doing, trying to help my mother's soul. He says, I'll pay the rest. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I said, well, when my mother does pass, I should get some inheritance. I will pay you back. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But ended up, that's exactly what I did. I paid him back immediately after she passed away. But I went on that pilgrimage. By the grace of God, I made it. I did collapse when we got to Italy. I had a terrible pain siege. But a stranger, we were waiting to get on a plane, and I had to get down on the ground. I was in terrible pain. And people in our group did nothing. It was one of these strange things. They didn't offer any help, and I didn't know the other people. I knew the priest, and I think he had never seen me in pain. And so I think he thought I was putting on something, the way he said, are you going to be all right? Like, get up. I couldn't. A stranger, someone else on the plane who was waiting, went and got me some orange juice at the airport area and brought me orange juice. And I wore my gray jumper, and I had these big pockets, and I had Aleve and stuff in my pockets, and took that and was able to get on the plane, and I got better. Which usually never happens with the pain siege. But I made it. I made it through that trip. I collapsed when I got back, of course, but it was miraculous that I was able to do that and keep up with the group. And I prayed in every single church. And in Siena, I even got on the very spot, they have it marked, where Catherine of Siena received her stigmata, and prayed for my mother. And I also prayed for her sister and my cousin, my aunt's daughter, because my aunt's daughter has not liked her mother. And not to her face, would say, but plenty to me for years. So I prayed that would stop. And I don't know if that's happened yet or not. That relationship ceased about 3 years ago when I said more about how that needed to stop to my cousin and explained how awful it would be for her soul that she could go before her mother went because her health is bad. My cousin's health is very bad, and to please stop the vitriol about her mother. But it didn't go down well, so she cut off, and that's part of the, just as an aside, some of the risk we take when we do a fraternal correction. You can lose a friendship. But if it's important, it needs to be said, you'll have to do what's best for the person's soul, or what you feel is best. And I had worked with my cousin for years on this. Got to be about every conversation was rancor toward her mother in the conversation she'd have. And then I would slip, though, into complaining, not about my mother, but about other situations. And it was a negative thing. Our conversation, I kept trying to bring up scripture or anything to move it in a different direction, and I wasn't gaining ground. So I think God knew it was time for that to part. And I didn't do the parting, my cousin did. But anyway, that's what I did on the pilgrimage. But the main reason was for my mother, and I added on her sister and my cousin as an add-on purpose. But so anyway, I did that, and 9 days after I got back, my mother called, and she was ready to come back. She was ready to come back. Come get me. Come get me. I'm getting you a ticket. Please come get me. And my sister found out, and she came also then, one of my sisters. So that worked out very well. I couldn't have done it by myself. Gotten everything packed up and ready and all. It worked out beautifully. So I saw my mother then when she was taken over by the devil. But I knew when I was shown that one little clear spot of skin that there was still hope. God was telling me there was still hope. And that's what I went on that pilgrimage, on that hope, that one little spot of skin. And it turned out my mother had a turnaround. She got away from New Age. She had gotten into a New Age group in Arizona. She was deep into Course in Miracle, which is not Christian. It's deceptive. It might seem like it, but it's not. It has false teachings in it, and rather despairing teachings of the world is but an illusion and all. And so anyway, she got out of that. She got back strongly into Christianity, apologized to my sisters for having upset them, and came around about her. She'd become very liberal and into, abortion rights and things, and not at all like our mother. And she got out of that before she died, and so she made great progress on earth in her last year of life. Last 11 months it was. So then since she passed, though, I hadn't seen her. I missed her terribly. And I was worn out. And I regretted that I complained that last year. It was not an easy year. She was not a happy camper. And people often take out frustration on those they love most and feel comfortable with, because she knew I would not abandon her at all. I had promised my dad on his deathbed, when I happened to be alone with him during the night, that I would make sure that Mother was not alone. that his wife would not be alone in whenever it came time for her to pass. And we didn't know then that my mother was so sick. That was about 2 months later, found out she had this pulmonary fibrosis and had never been a smoker, but it progressed rapidly in her lungs. So, but I remember the first time she came to me, I was having a pain siege, and I called out to her to help. Mom, help, 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 help me. And she came through my aunt. I've told this in another video, so I won't go into detail. But the next thing I knew, I had a phone call within like maybe 3 or 4 minutes of my calling out to my mother in this terrible spinal headache pain siege. And it was my aunt. You called? No, I didn't call you, Aunt Marilou. And turns out she had gotten a phone call. My aunt had. 3 minutes before. It was right after I called out to my mother for help. And the person said my name twice, urgently. But the phone was very staticky, my aunt said. And the only thing she thought was that I had called and needed help. But I said, no, I wouldn't call. I said, I need help. I said, but I wouldn't call and say my own name. Oh, yeah, well, that's right. You wouldn't, that didn't make sense. Well, who was it? She says, it sounded like your voice to me. My aunt did. I said, but it wasn't me. And then it struck me. I said, now, when was this phone call? It was just a couple or 3 minutes ago. I called you right away because it was so urgent sounding. I said, was that Mom's voice? Yes, that's who it was. It was her, but she wasn't expecting, obviously. It had been, I think, maybe 2 years or 3 years since my mother had died. I think 2.5 or 3. Of course she wouldn't think. How would her sister be calling her on a phone? But it was staticky, and the connection was odd, and just the whole setup. And I told my aunt I had just called out to Mom for help. Remember how she used to, when she was alive and was in Arizona, and I was in the Midwest, and my mother would call, and she could tell by my voice I was in bad shape. She would call my aunt in the hometown where I lived then. Go help. Please help her. She's in terrible pain. Do something. Help her. I can't be there. So my aunt would always call or, say, do you need it? Should I come over? And no, I didn't need her to come over, but I'd always say pray. Start praying for me. Because getting through severe pain like that, you just want to die. And I never had a gun around because of that, because you go out of your mind with pain. I didn't want to risk doing something that I shouldn't. So that was that time. That it wasn't an appearance of my mother, but it was definitely an intervention. Then another time I was in terrible pain, maybe 6 months later from that incident. And I had this vision, and I was either sort of partway asleep. I could never really sleep well. The pain was too bad, but I was in like a pain event where I wasn't fully conscious, but yet I wasn't asleep. But I had this vision. And my mother, I was in one room, and then I was taken through the wall. There was a partition. There's always a partition. Taken through a wall. And my mother was laying in a coffin. Well, she never had a viewing. She was cremated. But in this area, she was laying in a box, a wood box. And it looked like a coffin anyway. It was a wood box laying there. And I went over, a voice said, because I saw the box over there, I didn't see who was in it, and a voice said, "You're going to want to go over and look in that box. You're going to want to go over and look in that box." So I walked over in this vision state, and I looked down, and my mother was there. She looked beautiful. She was, older, but she looked beautiful. But she could not. She could look at me, but she couldn't speak. And she kept trying to reach her arms out to me, reach her arms out to grab hold of me, to grasp me, and to hug me. She tried so hard, but she couldn't move. She got them up like about this, and she couldn't move. And her eyes were just intently, desperately trying to show love to me and concern. Her eyes were beautiful, showing, and she had had terrible glaucoma when she died. Her eyes weren't like that anymore. They were beautiful and wide open, but desperate, trying to show love for me, because she couldn't speak. And she wanted to tell me, console me, and help me. And I came out of that, very much alert then, laying on my bed and just praising God for that experience of the gift of being able to see my mother, even though it was hard to see her, so trying to touch me and hold me and wanted to tell me how she loved me so much. It was powerful. And that gave me strength to suffer, to keep suffering. So that was that at that time. Then, I know there was another one. I did more blog writing then instead of in a journal. I think I still wrote in journals then. But there was another time, and it was still the same kind of thing. I knew Mother was not in heaven yet because she couldn't speak to me directly. There was always some kind of a partition, or the partition was that she could not look at me or speak. There was always something withholding. So I had another time then, and that was when I was on the island. And this one was in a dream. But I was always calling out, not every single day, but the finances were getting tough. On the island, I had gotten duped into a house that was tear down, I found out later. It was a tear down. But I was sold by my own realtor, by the inspector she recommended and brought in to do the inspection, said was so good. I found out later he was banned from inspecting anymore, and that other realtors never used him because he wasn't any good, and he would just make it sound good and say it was good for the realtor to sell it, for that one realtor who still used him. But then by the time I found out all this, he wasn't even allowed to inspect anymore. He was done. I think he'd even left the island. And then the first contractor who took me financially terribly and didn't do a good job. I had to keep hassling with him to get a subcontractor, electrician back, and did a terrible job and didn't even do the right size put in an apartment size electrical box instead of for a 3-bedroom house. So it was terrible what happened. And I didn't realize, and the other island people were the prices they gave me just to plumb the kitchen, to plumb a kitchen, was $1,000 per appliance. And when I told this man at Lowe's on the mainland, he said, "You're not," he says, "that's terrible." He says, "I'm going to teach you plumbing." And he did. He got me to journeyman level plumbing. I'd love to do my plumbing here, but I've lost my impetus and my back and my knee to get under the house. So that's why I hired this other man to do it for me. And I would do the bathroom vanity plumbing, but he's so counting on doing it. I know I don't dare upset him because he will, I can't risk him quitting. I'm going to go ahead and have him pay to do the vent pipe and plumb for the sinks. And I can then do the rest of it after he's done with the big stuff behind the walls. But anyway, because I learned how to do plumbing. And when I plumbed that refrigerator, put the water line in, and I did all the plumbing for the whole house. I tore everything out and redid it, and even did a upstairs bathroom from scratch. I know plumbing. And when I did that refrigerator and realized I was going to be charged $1,000 just to do the water line, and it took me 20 minutes to do the water line, including getting under the house to do it. Wow. And plumbed the dishwasher. That took a little longer because I also did the wiring for it and had to get coached from my electrician on that. But the plumbing was easy. Plumbing the kitchen sink. Of course, that took me a little bit just because it was my first one with the P-trap, and I had it in opposite or something, so got that straightened out. But it took me longer than the next ones I did were fast. But no, $1,000, $3,000 to plumb those three things. It was horrific. And I kept having situations like that. I didn't hire anyone to do that, obviously. I didn't have that kind of money. But I went through all my money on that island. My spiritual DA sent me $12,000 to help me. I paid everybody back after I got it done and sold. But it was stressful. And I would beg my mom, "Help me, Mom, help me. What am I?" But more than that with Mom then and Dad, I kept apologizing to them. I was 62 when I got that place. And it was a great piece of property, though. Ended up being great once I redid the entire house. But, and I did hire a man from the mainland that did the roof for me, and jacked up the porch, got that on right, and did siding. I took all the asbestos siding off with the mask and everything, but because legally only the homeowner can take it off, or you have to pay like $20,000 for these EPA people, whoever they are, to come and do it for you. So I didn't have that. I had to do it myself. It was a 2-story place, but got it done. But when it was in the thick of battle with that place, took me 5.5 years, and the living conditions were terrible for me. The rats and the raccoons, and it was bad. So I would just tell my mom and dad how sorry I was and how ashamed I was that they had left some inheritance for me, and look what I had done with it. Look at the mistake that I had sort of seen in my daughter who had been with me for the inspection. We each later said we remembered something the realtor said that seemed phony, but we didn't catch on. And I had this sense, but I buried it because I needed to get out of where I was in the Midwest. I had this horrible neighbor situation, and I had to get out of there. And the island was so gorgeous, and it was off the Puget Sound, and and just intrigued me. And I thought, what a great place for a hermit and all. And oh my goodness. So I was so apologetic of what I had done with their money, their hard-earned money. And other people said, just lose the money and get out of here. Don't bother trying to redo this house or do anything with it. Just sell it as a tear down and get out and lose everything. And I said, no, my mom and dad worked all their lives and saved and denied themselves so that their 3 daughters could have some inheritance. And I was the one that needed it most. And I said, and I'm the one that did this. And I said, I will die here first, trying to get their hard-earned money back for how foolish I had been. And so I had this dream. And my mom was all hunched over. She was sitting in a chair with her back to me. And there was no screen or wall between us, but she had her back to me. And she was hunched over with her head down. I could see the side of her face. And she was so sorrowful. I had never seen my mother in life that sorrowful. And all she said was, the money will be there. The money will be there. Well, I woke up. It was in the night, but I woke up after seeing that. And all I could think is that my mother was very unhappy with me. And I told my aunt, who is still living, and she's still living, my aunt is her sister. And I told her about that dream, and I said, I've so disappointed my mom. She says, no. She says, no, your mother would be so proud of you for how you're working and how you're learning all these skills and how you're turning this place into a beautiful home for the next person in such a lovely area. And I was gardening and selling produce. I didn't sell, I put it out on the stand, and I just had a clay pot that said donations. Thank you. And people were generously leaving donations for my organic produce, and it was that helped me with some income during the summer months. But I worked hard, worked, and then I'd have my pain sieges, and I didn't have pain meds, so I had some, but never enough. And the island doctors were giving me a hard time, convinced I was an addict. Of course, I would go in there, I'd have my work clothes on. I slept amongst the rats, and oh, it was terrible. But over 5.5 years, it got finished. But I was running out of money, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Because you can have a house 3/4 done, and it's still not finished. And you won't get much for it. So then the concern was I wouldn't have money to pay back people who had lent me money or given me money. And so but my aunt said, no, she'd be very, very proud. She said she was leaning down and sad because of all you've been through, because of how you suffer and how hard you work. And at your age, I was in my 60s then. So she said, no, she said, I know my sister. She said, and she was always so proud of you, always so proud. So she says, no, she just focus on that. She said the money will be there. Focus on that. My aunt had offered to lend me money. And she even said, no interest. She had her own family, her own children who were going to receive her money in inheritance. So, of course, I would pay it back. But I decided against that, doing that earlier on because my aunt was a little worried about doing that. I sensed that. And I thought, no, I'm not going to cause her to have any worries that she might not get it back or something. So, so I focused on that. And a young woman who wrote to me and called and wanted a lot of counsel at that time, also said, no, just remember, your mother told you the money will be there. Just keep knowing that. Your mother wouldn't tell you that from the other side. I knew my mother still was not in heaven, though, because she couldn't look at me. But that time she could speak, but her back was turned. There was that barrier. She couldn't look at me and speak, both. So, and it turned out it was right. The money was there. And when the place sold, it was not only I didn't get their money, I got their money back, but I got extra. And of course, with inflation, I needed it for the next place where I came. And but so that took someone else to help reassure me, though, in interpreting it. And sometimes that will happen with you when you have these situations, that you may not discern it correctly. And that helped a lot, because I cried a lot thinking of her, of how I disappointed my parents at that age of life to risk their hard-earned money like that. And I knew how hard they worked. So, and my mom teaching these high school kids that just been within the last 6 months, I found out that they knew she had a temper, and the boys would, I found out from one of her students who was 3 years older who had her, that the guys would set her up trying to get her to lose her temper and then laugh about it. And that crushed me to think of that, what she went through to earn her little teacher's salary. And all the hard work, and all the nights she'd be up till 11 grading papers, and because she wanted them to write well, and would leave copious suggestions and ideas and compliments, but also where to put every little comma if they missed it to encourage them. So that was the last time of that type. And then as I was looking for homes, and I had to go stay with a friend who had married my cousin for part of that time period, and keep with my realtor from a distance. And so I had seen this place driving by, but it was way too expensive. It was way overpriced. And at the time, but it was getting to the point where the other houses that were coming up for sale I hadn't seen, and they would go quickly. So I realized now I probably should have gotten, but it was gone the next morning when I was thinking it over overnight. And you can't think things over when it's a hot market. But that was a home that had a good price on it. It hadn't sold, it had been overpriced, they'd lowered it, but it was all done. It was all finished. But I was still thinking in terms of how good manual labor had been for me to build up my body. I didn't know yet that I was going to need a horrific spine surgery. I didn't know yet that I had this arachnoiditis. But this house then came on the market. Was lowered in price significantly. Still a bit high for the decor problems it had, and hadn't been updated at all. But the people who did it didn't have the best of taste when they did it, when they chose what they wanted for it. So it needed to be redone. And cabinets, things were old, and they didn't use quality, so they didn't hold up in the 20 years that the people had it. But it was in good shape otherwise. Wasn't beat up at all, because it was elderly people who had it. They were my age when they were in their 90s when they were selling it. So I decided to go ahead and get it because it has this beautiful view with common area, and you can't go long location. It's always good. But I didn't realize, well, of course, we've had inflation now, but the cost of help, and after my surgeries, I've had 5 surgeries in 4 years, 2 of them major. So I took a risk, and this is what happened. My body hasn't been able to do the work that it had done before. Anyway, I had a dream, and it was when I was preparing to come here just to do the inspection, and then fly back, and then still come when it was time to move in. But I was still wondering, should I follow through with this or not? Because it was more than what I had wanted to pay, had planned on. And it was a big place. I didn't need a big place. But I'd always had this idea of a spiritual bed and breakfast, and that was still toying in my little creative mind. But I had this dream, and my mother was in it, and she was in light, and she had this bright yellow dress on, long dress. And she was smiling. Now, at that time, she didn't speak. She didn't say anything. But when my dad was being taken to heaven with his guardian angel, he didn't speak either. But he smiled, and he turned, and I turned and was so happy for him. And I knew he was bathed in light, and his angel was beside him. My mother was just standing in this dream. She smiled at me. She had this wonderful smile. And she was all in light and with this bright yellow outfit. And I took that as a sign that she was okay with this, with what I was going to do, and with the house. And I also took it that she was in heaven, that she had made it, because I hadn't had a sighting of her it had been maybe 2 years. And before, definitely, she was still in progression. But this time, directly look in all this light. I have just recently wondered if that was some kind of a deception by the evil one. I don't know. I don't think so. It's easy to start doubting, especially when I'm in this position right now, here in this place. But otherwise, this has been marvelous for me. It's so peaceful and quiet. And I'm paying down my mortgage each month, which is like the houses have appreciated, but they're going back down now. Not to where I bought it, but the prices have come down, so I'm not going to make that much on it if I make, because of all the materials cost. I redid the whole kitchen and redid it far better than it was. So everything is far better than it was. But I don't think I'll be able to get as much out. I might break even or make a little, but nothing, because I've had to hire so many people. And I had an electrician who took advantage of me before I got a good one, and other handymen who took advantage. So that, I don't know, but I still think, because I have lovely neighbors, well, on one side, had trouble with the other side. Sexual harassment I had to get the police involved. Older man and his wife, but I guess it doesn't matter how old we are, or how old a man is. But anyway, that was a creepy, scary thing. And there's no communication now, which goes against my grain, but it had to be, and the detective said, has to be. It's not good situation. So had to deal with that problem. But otherwise, all the neighbors are wonderful. The one next door, what would have I done last summer with my surgery without her taking care of me for 6 weeks, 5 weeks it was. And comes over anytime I'm in trouble with help, needing help. So that's this has been a very good place for me. No problems other than just the sexual harasser, the pervert next door. So pray for him, please, and his wife. Anyway, and time will tell whether this was good. But I guess I'm just talking it over with you guys, but I shouldn't doubt, because I haven't seen my mother since, but never did I see her with all that light and that bright yellow and this huge smile she had. She was happy. And she gave me that sense of peace to go ahead and get this house. But also just the light. And looking at me directly like that, and the huge smile, there was nothing, no struggle, nothing blocking or anything. So I think I'm going to stick with that she's in heaven. But I decided I'm going to keep praying. I'm going to keep praying for both my parents. I'd sort of felt, put all the effort on people who are still in progression, but I think I'm going to start praying a prayer of thanksgiving for my parents and for them being in heaven, and then just let God deal with whatever. But anyway, those are my times with my mother, with visits from my mother. And I think I haven't needed any more than those, because here I'm not in the dire straits I was in before. And I got a pain doctor here. I have the medications I need. I have the pump in me that's been very helpful. But granted, so everyone knows, pain pumps don't take all the pain away. Pain meds don't take it all away. If they help just a little bit, that's how you have to operate, and be grateful for the little bits. But I have, like, my mother's linen tea towels. I have this stand here right by the bed, was from my dad's side of the family. It's an old antique. My mother loved it, and they touched it. I'm holding it now. I feel their DNA. DNA stays in things for a long, long, long time. When I need strength, I will just do things. I haven't done it yet this year because I haven't felt well, but last year still I made Lebkuchen, which my mother made. She had German background, every Christmas, and I would use the tea towel. I would use her recipe. That was my great-great-grandmother's recipe. And I would gain strength just from touching the tea towel. If I would get weepy thinking about missing my mother, I would touch something that was hers, and it would give me the strength. So and I also know that from other experiences with others on the other side, like saints or some that have come to me, that I said years ago that I would try more to have faith and to get their messages without them having to go to the effort to materialize so that I would see them. It's less effort if it's in a dream than in a vision, or like in a waking vision and a corporeal, where their corpus, their body actually is standing there. That takes more effort for them to materialize like that than, say, in a dream, or for us just to pick up their essence and their presence. So I leave it to all of you, is to, if you have a great need to see, that you miss the person that much that you need to see them appear, ask. But I decided not to, that I didn't want to put them through that effort. If God decided for me that they were to come, and I think this is what the person who misses the mother, she'd be the type of person who would not expect anything. she'd be the type of person who would want it like I do, where it's a gift from God when it happens. So just to clear that up, the person isn't pushing like I need to see or something. It's nothing like that. And I'm fairly sure it isn't anything that would happen because we just want that to happen. Mystical and spiritual phenomenon always happens because God knows we need something. There's an important reason for it that God knows that we need. And I think it's the case then that he sends or allows our loved ones or whomever to make contact with us, or those who are already in pure love and have power to come and assist us. So that's been my experiences anyway. So, but I don't see anything wrong in asking. If you are heartsick with longing and miss someone that much, that's a need. That's a very important need. Ask God, or find other ways to sense their strength and their presence, and then just wait. And if it happens, it happens, and if not, it doesn't. But I'd be very surprised if this mother, who had been in religious life for 20 years and had in her life with her husband, who had been an abusive person to her, from the relating that this viewer shared, and the mother eventually then got her education and nursing and all, because she knew she was going to have to take care of these daughters. The husband wasn't good with the youngest especially, so and get them into college or through college or whatever they were going to need. So sacrificed herself for these children and something like that, and then went into religious life. I'm sure she's progressed and in pure love long since. I shouldn't say I'm sure. I don't know. What do I know? But when you think of a soul like that, who suffered so and then was so in love with God to be in a religious order, and after her children were all grown and on their own, her daughters, and sounds like a very beautiful soul. So God bless his real presence in us, and that's more ramblings on my mother visiting, and the turnaround, though, from the demonic, and my being shown that one little patch to tell me there's still hope. And that's the status my son is in. The last time I was shown his soul, he's alive, but in trouble. Please pray for him. Pray for all my family. Appreciate it. God bless his real presence in us, and praise God for all the wonders of how he reassures us of the next life, of eternity, and the beauty of it, and the good of it, and how, yes, we do continue progressing, but we do progress. And then there's heaven waiting us, pure love, becoming one with pure love, that we become pure love in our beings also. And let us keep praying for that we keep learning it on earth. And I was having a delayed reaction of some upset this morning, just feeling like sort of complaining and why couldn't there be a little bit more love or something, a little more, even if I could have been with the family that's close by for a half hour on Christmas would have been nice. Then I thought, God knows me. He knows me. And he knows that this is the family he's giving me now. The viewers. We're all the ones that have this topic. My children have their lives in the world. And they grew up with me. And they're not into it, not into me now. And if they were, I would be giving my time and attention to them, all grown up with their own families, instead of to the videos and sharing what little bit I can share that maybe helps someone else. So I thought that's why God is having this situation. He knows me. He knows I would be off doing that. And they don't need me. They have wonderful lives. They have their children. They don't need my attention or my spiritual talk. They've heard it. They're not interested. It's not where they are. But the ones who are listening to whatever parts they find of interest. So this is what God wants me doing. Oh, anyway, that brushed aside all my little old, woe is me. And it was good. Thank you, Lord. Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.